Yeah, I seem to be a little not in the, I'm tired. Let's just say it that. Okay, so if you grab a Siddur and turn to 155, you will recognize the text that sits in front of you. 155. And today is all on this page. Shema, we're going to Shema. Everybody listen up. All right. So the Shema is not it makes me crazy when I hear people say the Shema is the most important prayer, because it's really not a prayer. It's a biblical reading. It's part of this dialogue that goes on in the service where we talk to God and then God speaks back to us. This is God speaking back to us. This is from the Bible in a sense. And so it's taken from Deuteronomy, all right, chapter 6. The term Shema, you'll hear it often referred to, can either refer to the one line, as it is, but people will also, as you know, often will talk about all this, that, and the 3 paragraphs that follow. So when you say Shema, it can mean both things, all right? And so let me frame this for you. Many love stories begin with a wedding scene in which the partners stand together, they express their love, their commitment, their devotion to one another. In Judaism, the statement of commitment between God and Israel is this. This is the wedding vow in a sense. I often talk about the fact that when you say God is one, you're also saying God is the one, to the exclusion of anything else. When you get married, that's what you're saying. Right? This is the one. To the exclusion, I'm now off limits to all others. Right? My primary commitment is here. That's, in a sense, if you think of it in that terms, that's what's going on here. This is the only real creed within Judaism is Echad, is Adonai Echad, that there's no other. There's virtually no other belief that you have to own to fit within the realm of Judaism. The verse itself, let's talk about some pragmatics. It's said in a loud voice, initiated by the person leading, the Shliach Tzibor. Everybody joins in, as is befitting a coronation of a king. All right? Everybody declares this in a loud world. The concept behind it, in the ancient world, people had many gods. Therefore, if I have a God who created me, you have a God who created you, there's no connection between us. The idea introduced by Judaism of one God makes us, in a sense, all brothers and sisters. We have a responsibility one to the other in a way in which multiple gods doesn't oblige us. In addition, we have here, it talks about saying it morning and evening. Okay, so within the text. Let's read this. I'm sure you've all read it before, but let's read it out loud. All right, so hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all that is yours. It's oftentimes translated with all your might. These words which I command you this day shall be taken to heart. Teach them again and again to your children. Speak of them when you sit in your home, when you're walking on your way, when you lie down, when you rise up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand and as symbols above your eyes. They translated it poorly. Inscribe them upon the doorposts of your home and upon your gates. Basically, you're saying this morning, you're saying it evening. That is an example, first of all, of what is known, the term is a merism. Merism means when you cite the polar opposites, what you're saying is everything in between. If you say north and south, you're talking about the whole range of everything in between. When you say night and day, you're talking about everything in between. So one of the ways in which to understand this is it's saying all these words have to be with you at all times. Okay, so that's one understanding. And many of the rabbis understood it that way. The rabbis also understood it. I'm going to try and see if this works. Rabbis also understood it very literally. And so where does it show up in our service? In the evening and in the morning. Guess where it doesn't show up? In the afternoon service. Okay, so in terms of how it got built into the service, they took it literally. But at the same time, they understand the larger picture meant it's a merism, meaning all across the board. You can't say, well, you speak words of Torah now and not then. It's all the time. I'll get to that, I promise. Okay? One of the ways in which you can tell how important a particular concept is its frequency of appearance. Think about the following. So we have it in the morning and the evening service. We all know that. All right? But the line of Shema itself also shows up in the Musaf Kedusha. It also shows up when you take the Torah out. You stand and do it, right? All right? On Yom Kippur, it marks the conclusion of the day as part of our bedtime prayers. It's a deathbed confessional. The frequency of this particular prayer is telling you something about its centrality, all right, the biblical text, the concept of it. The other thing to note is in the Bible, when it says, you look in Deuteronomy, this phrase Shema Yisrael shows up 5 times. Every time it does, and we know the one, Shema Yisrael, and what follows is Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, but there are other times, it shows every time it does, it's telling you, here comes a sermon. Listen up. Here comes a sermon. All right? This is Moses speaking to the people in Deuteronomy.
Is the number 5 particularly?
I don't think so, but I bet we could write the drash that makes it. Okay? So what I want to look at, I gave you in the handout, there's one page that looks, you'll see there's letters in Hebrew and there's big red, etc. Okay, there, that's it, okay? It's the third page, I think, there. So let's translate it and let's note a few things about how it plays out in the Torah. So Shema, traditionally understood as, it's a command form in the singular, hear, pay attention. So it's not just physical hearing, but it's really listening and getting the message, all right? And it needs to be said out loud. Why? Because if you don't say it out loud, you can't hear it. I remember one of my professors saying to me, the best way to study is to say things out loud because you hear it, you speak it, you're using more senses, and it will therefore stay with you longer. Made perfect sense. Who's supposed to hear? Israel, Yisrael. It could be the Jewish people past, present, future. All right? This is Moses speaking to the people of Israel and summarizing the teaching of monotheism, but it also could be, what else does Israel mean? Jacob. There are those who have said this is Jacob speaking to his sons. Right? That's the Midrash. That's not to be taken fully literally, but the Midrash portrays Jacob, and they're standing at his deathbed saying, yes, Dad, we hear you, we will follow your ways. Okay? You then have Adonai. Adonai is literally a name for God. George, Bob, Mary, Fred, whatever you want. Adonai is the name that God gives us in his own words. And then you come to Eloheinu. The best way to interpret this is Adonai is God with a big G, and Eloheinu is God with a little g. That God is our God. Among all theoretically the gods that might be considered out there, God is our God. Adonai is our God. All right, and then Adonai Echad. Echad, one, unique, unchallenged, unparalleled. God wants to do something in the beginning of creation story, which we read yesterday. He doesn't need to go out and get construction plans. He doesn't need, all the things that we're going to do in this congregation is if we construct, God doesn't need to do that. God says, let there be light, and hello, light. There's no challenges. He's not worried about city councils and everything else and who's going to put what permit. This is not part of God's plan. God says, yeah, and that's it. God creates by fiat. So you have here, the one creed within Judaism is that God is unparalleled and unchallenged. There's no one out there in any way, no existence that in any way presents a problem for God if God wants it. That's the one creed. The other thing to note is that begins, Shema, I mentioned to you this, is in the singular. Shema, it could be shimu, would be the plural. All right? Shema is in the singular, it's directed at you personally, but then by the fourth word, it's not Elohai, it's Eloheinu, it's our God. You personally have to recognize our God. Okay, so there's a shift in the nature of who's being addressed. Each person is individually addressed and commanded to the collective. The other thing, I don't know why they didn't do this in our Siddur. If you look in the paper I gave you, I put two letters in red. If you look in the Torah, those two letters are larger than all the other letters. If I pull out the Torah right now and roll it to Devarim chapter 6, you'll see the words are there and two letters are giant. So of course, when that's the case, somebody has to come up with an understanding of why. And I've got a collection of them. So that would, right? Got good news. I have lots of them. But one must be important too. It tells you there's lots of them. We're not sure what. We're not sure. People are interpreting. So the first thing is if you take the ayin of Shema, the first word, the large letter, and you take the dalet at the end of echad, together they form the word aid, witness. And Rabbi said, we stand as witnesses to God's presence and uniqueness and oneness, and that's our role. Isaiah says, you are my witnesses. Okay? So the first lesson to be pulled from this, again, this is all midrash. Right? The ayin and the dalet together, aid, witnesses, we are witnesses. Let's just take each one independently. God's oneness. All right, we're delivering God's power and God's message. The ayin alone. What letter sounds like an ayin? An aleph. If this were an aleph, the word would be, because there's no vowels, right? Would be Shema. Shema means perhaps. So now what you've got is perhaps Israel, the Lord our God is one. That's a very different statement. So the rabbi said, of course that's why there's an ayin. Is that the reason? Okay, but that's one interpretation of it. Okay, so you've got the ayin alone. It's a perhaps. That doesn't work for any of us. Why is the dalet large? What letter looks like a dalet? A resh. If this was a resh, if we made the mistake and assumed it was a resh, the word would be acher. So now you have, which means another. So what you have is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is another. If it's another, how many are there? More than one. Okay? It's a complete opposite message that you're trying to convey. You see what the rabbis are doing? We don't really know why they're larger, but they built lessons out of things that seemed out of place. Yes?
For something I think that is so important, why is the new verbal not enlarging the ayin?
I don't know, and I'm not sure the old ones did either. I don't know. I'm not sure why they chose not to. And the other thing is the Baruch Shem Kavod, they made it slightly smaller, but it should be more small, and you'll see why in a few minutes, okay, when I get there. Okay? I don't know their logic, so I can't speak to it. The other thing we do, you'll hear me do this, and again, to distinguish the dalet from the resh, is when I sing it, you'll hear me say, Adonai Echad. We don't usually do that with a D at the end of a word. But here, I'm doing it so that it's clear that's not a resh. By the way, I didn't come up with that. That's Jewish tradition. That's not Levine. All right. You can make it Levine. You want to make it Levine? Velva will appreciate it. I don't know if you're watching Velva, but hello. And then you'll see what is it we do physically? Cover our eyes, which is clear. You're blocking out all distractions. You're making a point of saying, this is a core message. I need to focus on this. I'm blocking out all the distractions that could pull my mind away.
And this is a more contemporary action of covering your eyes.
No.
When I was growing up, you didn't cover your eyes.
All right, so first of all, I need to repeat because I was told last week I was very bad and didn't repeat comments and questions for people online. So the comment was that this is a new behavior of covering your eyes, that it wasn't, Leslie was saying you didn't do it when you were growing up. It might have been your synagogue or but it's not a new thing, it's rabbinic. It's not rabbinic. It is rabbinic, and therefore it has history. That's why I said it's not Levine, it's rabbinic. All right. So, okay, why does it show up everywhere else? Now let me give you the pragmatic of why it shows up everywhere else. Good question. Why do we cover our eyes sometimes and not others? When we're reading it exactly as it should be in its place here, we cover our eyes. Why is it everywhere else? A number of times I've described to you there were moments in history where the larger society, is a euphemism for the Christian world, the larger society forbid us from doing certain things. All right? They assumed that Adonai Echad was a rejection of the Trinity. Okay? And therefore the Shema was forbidden. They knew where in the service it would be recited, and so they would send officers into the synagogue to make sure it didn't get recited. Okay? So what did the rabbis do? They placed it all over the service. Right? In other words, now, we would have said Shema. Oh, yeah, we would have said Shema. And so it's in the Torah service. Because they would come in for that moment, make sure you don't say it, and leave. Right? So they put it elsewhere. Very pragmatic. All right? But now, when we have it actually back in its place, that's where we're really actually saying Shema. We cover our eyes and go through the full rituals associated with it. Some people still cover their eyes for the others, but that's not the predominant practice. Okay? All right. Sitting and standing. Jews can never agree on anything. This is a given. We sit. The tradition is the halakha has become you sit. All right. There's a discussion between Hillel and Shammai, as you can imagine. They didn't agree. You want to guess who said sit? Hillel, right? And Shammai always loses. Okay? He said, let's stand. Hillel says, let's sit. And we follow Hillel. And just to emphasize that, in the 9th century, the Gaon Amram made an attack on the Palestinian Jews who would stand for this, while the Babylonian Jews sat. You have lots of arguments between the communities, the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, okay? There's battle going on, so there's a political debate on who's right. Guess how it finally gets solved? The Crusaders overrun Palestine. They destroy the Jewish population there, and there's no one to fight for the argument of standing anymore. So guess what the custom is? This is the way oftentimes in most events in history, the decision on what practice exists, and not just in Judaism, all society, is who won? We wish ideas were decided in the marketplace of ideas, and we're all comparing and saying that's the better one. That's not how it usually happens. Who wins? The Babylonians, right? We're Babylonian because the Babylonians survived beyond the time. We follow the Babylonian Talmud as well. Okay, but again, that's all. It's political. In other words, who survives? Those are the right answers. Who are the Kohanim? They are the descendants of Aaron. Why? Because the Kohanim, the priests in the south, were descendants of Aaron. The priests in the north were descendants of Moses. Which group gets destroyed first? The north. They all probably ran south and become part of the southern kingdom. But now the priests are all descendants of Aaron. Why? Because they survived longer. It's that pragmatic. Rabbi Akiva is an old man. The Roman decree is no public studying of Torah. We read about this in the Martyrology. He's imprisoned in Caesarea, and he's taken out early one morning to be executed. And on his way out, he's not seeking a verse to make any kind of statement. He's saying, what are my obligations as a Jew in the morning? To recite Shema. You open up the Mishnah, that's the very first tractate, to recite Shema in the morning. So what does he say? He says, Shema. He's basically not only fulfilling a commandment, he's putting it in the faces of the Romans. While they're taking him out, he's defying them. Okay? It is, and so, as a result from that, yes? In terms of the prayer, but there's no halacha on modani. There's a halacha that Shema has to be said within a certain time frame in the morning. And by the way, that's another reason why you find it in the preliminary service, is because what if you get this, if the service starts later, you can still say it before it's supposed to be said. Okay? This way you're fulfilling that obligation even though you're going to say it later. All right. Nonetheless, once Akiva says this, then it became, what do you say? What do martyrs say? They follow Akiva's lead. It was never his intention to be that for that purpose, but it became that purpose. All right? Plus, we recite it in our deathbeds. If you've ever seen somebody do vidui, the confessional of death, Shema is part of the ritual. It's become the way in which we transfer to the next world is through this recitation of the recognition of God and God's uniqueness. All right, Sandra. Why Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Li'olam Va'ed? You will notice in our prayer book it said somewhat, it looks a little bit smaller. I've seen it much smaller in others. And it also says next to it, recited quietly. So the ancient method of saying Shema was different than it is today. Twice a day, the Kohanim would proclaim Shema as part of the daily services sacrificial system. And upon hearing it, okay, the same way when in the temple service, when they heard God's name, the Tetragrammaton, all right, the people would respond, Baruch Shem, praise is the name, because they've just heard the name, Kavod, in its honor. All right, Baruch Shem Kavod, Malchuto Li'olam Va'ed, and God's kingship forever. Okay? So it was the response of the people to this prayer when they would hear it. However, and here's why it's not said out loud. The Torah, if you look in the Torah, it's not there. Look at Deuteronomy 6, 4 to 9, and you'll see Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. There's nothing in between. And there is a halacha that says you cannot add, it's right out of Deuteronomy, you cannot add or detract from God's words. Right? So here we have this extra line that we add, but we de-emphasize it by not saying it out loud. So we have a line that's not in the Torah. People will say it. Now, no Reform synagogues that are saying it today. What's the exception? And then the end of Yom, right, on Yom Kippur, well, all throughout Yom Kippur we say it, right? Why? Because on Yom Kippur is when they actually did the service in which he would announce God's name, the Tetragrammaton, and the people would say it. So in that moment, we're recreating the experience of Yom Kippur in the ancient world, so that's the one exception. But the rest of the year, it is deliberately done silently to indicate this is not Torah. The other lines are, this is not. Yes, please. That what? No, the Shema itself is Torah. Baruch Shem Kavod is rabbinic. Okay, so what just again, you're suggesting that the Baruch Shem Kavod has you're suggesting it in Shoftim, it's implied. The reality is that you won't find that in Shoftim. What you're going to find, that's rabbinic commentary on the text. It's called Midrash. But it's not in the Torah that's how it's done. So that is rabbinic in its nature. It's an understanding of the Torah that's not in the Torah. Okay, so and so the result is it cannot maintain the holiness of Torah words. You've got to distinguish between that which is Deoraita from Sinai and that which is Derabanan, that from the rabbis. Okay, a lot of our mitzvot are Derabanan, they're from the rabbis, but there is a distinction of holiness between mitzvot of those which you can't budge on something from Torah. There's more flexibility when it comes from the rabbis, and even the Talmudic rabbis understood that. That's clear. They're not saying don't do this, but they understood different levels. So it is rabbinic in its application, even though it might be you could find it hinted at. Other people wouldn't see it, but it's rabbinic. Okay? Sandra, does that kind of get at your question? What is it not answering? Yeah, it isn't as important. It's, in a sense, it's a parallel to Amen. It's a parallel to Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. All right? It's a response to prayer. It's not prayer. It's a response to Torah. It's not Torah. All right. I know that may not be wonderful as a response, but the reality of it is not part of the Torah, and there's a need to make a distinction. Well, yes, the rabbis of the first century did it. Particularly once the temple is destroyed, what they do is create traditions that are meant to remind you of the temple, because they believed the temple would be restored relatively within 70 years, and they had to keep people on task. Okay? What's that? 155. Now, I just want to also point out, in the packets that you have, there's a page I did a number of years ago. Looks like a Talmud page. All right. This is Levine. You've got the text in the middle, just like a Talmud page. I took God's name out of it. It says you have a hey there instead, so that you can throw this piece of paper out if you so choose to. All right. You have the English translation below it. And all around this, when I teach this to the kids, this is what I give them. There's 900, all these different questions. The comments I want to make about the text with a question in front of them. All right? So they have it visible. I'm going to go through all this without directly answering each one in place, but that's what you've got, and it can go back at the end. Very clever. Thank you. All right. So, we now have done 2 lines. In the next paragraph, the Torah has 613 commandments. In the next paragraph are 5 of those. It's dense. It's thick. 5 in one paragraph. All right, so let's play with what they are. The first, v'ahavta, is a command form. You will love the Lord your God. You will. All right? We know that Judaism commands us in many places. Love the stranger, love God, love, that's a basic concept within. We're commanded to love the prophets tell us God's love is all about it. We hear it all the time. All right. How does one command somebody to love? This is the question that comes up. How do you command somebody to love? Stranger comes up to you and says, I demand you love me. The first thing is you're going to call the police. Then a therapist, I'm not sure in which order. Okay. It's bizarre, out of context. On the other hand, if it turns out to be someone who loves you, who has been watching over you, who's been taking care of you, who has saved your life many times, who is kind and generous, it's a lot easier to understand a sense of being commanded to love. It's sort of an expectation of a parent on a child. Okay, certainly in the young ages. Yes, well, you have both. Yes, you have both, but respect is the greater, is the more common. Yes. So usually we love them, and there's all sorts of scenarios, and every family has its dynamics. I'm not going there, but normally in the normal common situation, we love our parents without being commanded to do so. It's just sort of the natural outcome. And so, in the case of God who provides for us, I said this out in the lobby, here I'm struggling with my eyes, but the real message is, look at all the things in my body that are working, right? There could be 2 million things that go wrong. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that my biggest issue is I'm having problems with my eyes. Really? Big deal. This is the blessing you say. Someone said when you go to the bathroom, all the openings will work and all the, et cetera, that the body works the way it should. Right? And that we owe everything to God, our health, our families, our home, our abilities to think, understand, to speak, to walk, to pray, whatever it is we do, in a sense, is a miracle. Okay? And it's a gift of grace. In other words, God doesn't ask for anything, doesn't owe us anything. Nothing. It's just because yes. Just yes. And in such a case, the rabbis understood, in such a case, how could you not then turn around? And if you don't, it's like theft. You're stealing. All right? So that's the framework on this. Then you go on to when do you love God? Well, how? With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And what do the rabbis do with that? Now we're getting into Midrash, we're getting into rabbinics. They would say to you, with all your heart means with both of your impulses, both the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, your impulses to do the right things, your impulses to do sometimes not the right thing. With all that you exist, there's nothing outside of it. Even that which is not wonderful needs to be dedicated to serving and loving God. There's nothing outside of that possibility. With all your soul, even if God basically says wants your life is to be taken. It's the same thing like a parent with a child. Parents, you put your life out, right? You put your life at risk to protect your children. Because that's the intensity of the love. All right, and then finally, with all your might, it's rabbis here. How do they translate it here? With all that is yours, all your possessions, in a sense, is what they're suggesting, which is another way the rabbis understand this. All of your wealth, everything you have, is a gift from God. You may work hard. Lots of people work hard. I remember my German professor writing in my yearbook: success equals hard work, study, and luck. Because hard work and study don't get you there, don't necessarily get you there. They may. Without them, you're not going anywhere. But there's a lot of people who work very hard and fail. A lot of people who study very hard and fail. I wouldn't use luck, I would use God. Okay? There's a piece of God in this process, and so that we owe everything we have to God, or I would say to God's creatures. There's a sense of sharing in the world. All right. And then it's also, even the blessings of God have to come even in good times and, by the way, in bad times. Sound like a marriage vow? Right? I will take you to be my husband, wife, in good and bad. Good health, bad health, whatever. There's no times out. So there's no possessions, there's no times, there's no impulse. All of that is all outside of this realm of obligation to love God. The rabbis were describing a scenario that's all inclusive. If you go to Yeshiva University, their byword is Torah and science. And it's based on the idea, and I love this, that by studying science, the more we get to know, the more we can see the universe as God sees it. The more we understand DNA, well, God understood that all along. Now we're getting a look into the world as God can see it. I love that approach. All right. So what I want to do now, before we're still, by the way, still in the first commandment of love. All right, is review structurally within the Siddur the last section. If you look at the page before, we did this last time, 154. Ahava Rabbah Ahavtanu. You have loved us. You, God, have loved us. Now flip the page back to 155. There's an in-between line, and then you have, and you will love the Lord your God. And in between those two lines is essentially a wedding vow. God loves us. We are commanded to love God. And Shema becomes the wedding vow in between. That's how the rabbis structured this. Because the prayer book is not from God. The prayer book is rabbinic. They structured it in such a way that there's a relationship being built here. The prayer before, Ahava Rabbah, you, God, have loved us. Turn the page, V'ahavta, and you will love God. So there's a reciprocity. In between those two paragraphs is the line of Shema, which becomes the wedding vow that connects the two. Now I'm going to debunk everything I just said. So historically, if you look at this text, and Deuteronomy is built on a model of other ancient texts. And in those, the covenant in Deuteronomy in particular, you have these vassal overlord treaties of the ancient Semitic world. In this treaty, Israel is God's vassal. God is the overlord. Israel is the servants, in a sense, paralleling the ancient world. And all the obligations are owed to God as one would owe to a king. In return, God has responsibilities and obligations to the vassal of the Israel, such as protection from third-party invasions, physical protection. That's the model of a king and its people. Okay? What's significant here is that all of those ancient treaties use the word love. You'll love the overlord. Because in the ancient world, love didn't mean what we mean by it. It meant loyalty, obligation to. When we sing, and when someone gets up and says, Ahava Rabbah is about love, it's not really. It's about a relationship in which we have obligations one to another. The idea of love didn't really exist. People didn't get married for love. Tavia and Golda, 25 years we've been married. Do you love me? And what's her answer? I wash your clothes. What's that? Yes. Right? That's for in much of history, that's how love got expressed. It wasn't the sort of ephemeral feeling that it's wonderful. Let me not put love aside. All right? But that's not what they meant when they talked about you will love and God will love you. It was a relationship of responsibility one to the other. In the modern world, we tend to we make it nice. We nice it up. So I've given you the rabbinic lens, and then I've given you the likelihood of how it played out in its origins. Doesn't mean we can't reinterpret. A lot of times we borrow customs and superimpose new meaning on them. That's pretty normal. But in its origin forms, it really didn't mean love as we think of it. Yes. Yeah. Covenant is contract. Well, is that like a 3-person relationship? He did the marriage. Go ahead. I'm being bad. Go ahead.
So anyway, part of the wedding ceremony, he says, Steve, do you take Wendy to be your lawful wife? And I was standing there waiting for him to say, in good times and bad, and sickness and health, and all this kind of stuff. And he never said it, and he looked at me and he said, well, do you?
Oh, you didn't realize he was finished.
So, the Orthodox?
Well, when I do a wedding, I don't do that. I don't ask that question. It's not part of the. He added that as part of a recognition of American society, but most rabbis don't. I don't.
Because he didn't say it.
Right. I don't say, do you take? I don't even say that. All right. So, yeah. So, yes, there's a case of cultural borrowing. You asked me about that in the last hour. That's a case of cultural borrowing. All right. Second commandment. We've gone through one. Teach children. V'shinantem livanecha. The idea of studying Torah is a way in which a Jew expresses love for God. You do it from earliest morning until you lie down at night. Knowledge of Torah is historically been the way in which social caste within Judaism has been determined. If the worst thing you could be would be an Am Haaretz, someone who didn't know Torah. That's the bottom of the scale. Torah study was a way of saying, I embrace God, I'm in relationship with God, this is how I'm going to express my love for God. All right? And so we also then have the obligation to take that knowledge and to extend it to the next generation. That's what we do. Teach Torah to our children. Now the word vishinantem, you would think you'd find here v'limadatem or something to that effect, to teach, doesn't literally mean to teach. It means review it again and again and again and again until you become versed in Torah. Rashi basically says, you know you've learned it when someone asks you a question and you don't stammer in your response. You've got it ready to go. That's knowledge of Torah. You don't have to process anything. You have the answer at your fingertips. All right? To play with that, Shinayim in Hebrew, which is not really what this is saying, it's a different root, but the rabbis played with it. Shinayim in Hebrew is teeth. And they would say it's like you need to break your teeth on the text. You really got to get down to it. Rashi would say if you haven't gone over it 100 times, that's a good start. But 101's better. And this obligation and concern for systematic education is on all of us for everybody else's children as well. We have a communal obligation to make sure every child is educated. And so that's where you get religious schools and day schools. The best teaching happens at home. And in the early 1900s, there was a book came out described. In the early 1900s, the families would go to the rabbi and say, Rabbi, I can teach my kid in Judaism at home. I need you to help me figure out how is he going to fit here in America. That's what I need you to work with him. That's not where we're at today. The role is reversed. Okay? Now parents are saying, I can teach my kid to be an American. Would you do me a favor? Teach him to be a Jew. Okay? We have created rituals around this process. So, a Jewish student's first visit to a classroom, Leslie, I know you know this, is that it was enveloped in all sorts of rituals. So you'd walk into a class and you'd get a blank slate. And on that slate, in honey, they would write out all of the letters in Hebrew. So an aleph in Hebrew, in honey, a bet in Hebrew. And each child would say each letter aleph and lick off the aleph and say bet and lick off. They were trying to convey that it should be a moment of delight, that this studying should be sweet and wonderful in a very symbolic way. We all know, we've heard the phrase that Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, that the study of Torah is equal, if you study the Torah, it's equal to the performance of all the other 612 commandments. 1 equals 612. Now, they're speaking metaphorically, because the assumption is, one, if you don't know Torah, then you can't perform the commandments. And the more you study, the more likely, not a guarantee, there are no guarantees. We all know the unethical scholars. There's unethical in every category of life. Okay? But the more you study Torah, the more likely you are to behave in ways that reflect what God would want in the world. All right? And then I've given you a number of sources on study, and just for time's sake, I'm not going to go through them together with you, but you're welcome to take a look from the rabbinic writings in particular. Third one is speak Torah, words of Torah at all times, when you lie down and when you rise up. That's what I talked about before about the merism. That inciting when you lie down, when you rise up, you're talking about all day long. It's implying all the time. So we're told to make Torah our guide in every situation. For years, the Christian kids were wearing these WWJD bracelets, which was what would Jesus do? And they were trying to say to them, when you get caught into a situation, a moral situation, to stop and reflect on, from their perspective, what would God want of you? What choice would God want you to make? We have that too. We had that before them, 2,000 years. We have tzitzit, all right? But the message is the same. The message is to say there's no situation outside. So there is a Jewish business ethic. There is a Jewish shopping ethic. There is a Jewish sports participation ethic. There is a Jewish way to behave in a bar. Okay, right? Well, the basic message is in a public setting, a Jew can drink, but a Jew may not get drunk. Because people will see that and think that your God is not, you're not representing God well when you do that. Okay? Again, and mind you, I said in a public setting, meaning outside of the Jewish world. Again, what we do internally is one thing. We're not worried about being representative, so I'm not suggesting, you've heard my sermons on drinking, that's a whole other story. Okay? Rashi says that the main topic of conversation should be Torah and the service of God. First of all, if you do that, your gossip is going to be limited. Okay? And two is there's a tradition that if two Jews get together over a meal and don't say at least one word of Torah, it's a sin. It's the same message. It should come up somewhere. Make holy all of your activities. All right, so speak words of Torah at all times. So we've got so far, love God, teach children, speak words of Torah at all times. The fourth and fifth are more physical. The fourth is tefillin. The mitzvah of tefillin and mezuzah are part of that whole love relationship with God. Maimonides taught us that the tefillin, quote unquote, remind us continually of God and our duty to revere and love God, to keep all his commandments and to believe concerning God that which every religious person must believe. Well, that's as vague as you can get. Okay? We do know that by the time of the Second Temple, or no later, actually, probably even the 3rd century before the common era, tefillin similar to ours were already being worn. All right. Originally, Jews wore them all day long. All right, and they took them off only at night. We know later Maimonides wore tefillin when he studied Torah. The Vilna Gaon in the 19th century wore tefillin all the time. Rabbi Kook, and I love this. Rabbi Kook had a special tefillin made for him that he could conceal beneath his hat so it wasn't visible, and under his left sleeve. Why? So that he wasn't guilty of appearing to have excess piety. All right? We all know the person who does something publicly in a way to show you how pious they are. He was saying, no, I'm going to do this because it's about God. Traditionally, we wear tefillin during shacharit, the males do, and now women are encouraged to do so as well. And we know Rashi's granddaughter wore tefillin, so there's pretty good precedent for it. Okay, it's not new. And it serves as both a reminder of the commandments, but I would say here, I love this analogy. If the Shema is the wedding vow, the tefillin are the wedding ring. Now, why don't we wear them on Shabbat? One is the issue of carrying. Yeah, it's like why don't we use lulav and etrog? Why don't we blow shofar on Shabbat? The concern was somebody will have left it home and feel not brought it in advance and feel like right. So you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat from one domain to another. I missed it. So tefillin is the wedding ring, Shabbat is the wedding vow. Okay.
So when you're talking
Yes, within that area. But again, you go to the far right of Orthodoxy and they don't accept Arabs. All right, so it's only, again, there's always someone out further to the right who doesn't accept whatever you do. There's always somebody, by definition. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had somebody to the right of him, I'm sure. I don't know who it was, but I'm sure. All right, so the other thing is there's a tradition that you need two signs, an oat, two signs of a reminder of your relationship with God every day. Talis and tefillin, serve those 6 days a week. On Shabbat, in Vishamru, we refer to Shabbat as an ot hili olam. It is a permanent sign. So you already, by wearing a talit and observing Shabbat, you already have your two signs fulfilled, and the tefillin are no longer needed. And so therefore they're not worn. The two have already been fulfilled. Tzitzit and tefillin, and on Shabbat it's tzitzit and Shabbat. You have oti liolam, right? The marriage, this love relationship that I describe in terms of the tefillin being a wedding ring, are literally acted out when we wrap them. First of all, we put them on our arms. It's not on top of the muscle, it's inside so that you will bring it down, it's to your heart. The other thing is, when you wrap them around your finger, you recite 3 verses from the prophets. Here's the translation as you're wrapping them. I will betroth you to me forever, ve'irasti chalili olam, ve'irasti, because I am betrothed. I will betroth you to me with righteousness, justice, love, and compassion. I will betroth you to me with faithfulness, and you shall love the Lord your God. Could the marriage imagery be any more clear? Okay? So the Shema becomes the vow, and the tefillin serve as the ring that says, I am off limits. All right? I've got my God. Don't try to convince me of anything else. Leave me alone. All right. Mezuzah. The mezuzah serves as a sign. Lots of doors have mezuzah. We're going to get into what the Shulchan Aruch talks about this in a sense. But essentially what its message is that this place is dedicated to the service of God. It goes on every door in your house to convey the message that you can't hide. Right? There's no going in the back and watching porn and God won't know. All right, whatever. I'm picking a bizarre example. Whatever it is, right? Right. But whatever the behavior is, you can't go back and have a ham sandwich in some closet. All right, God knows. All right, and so and you're reminded of that as you walk into the house, and then as you leave the house, you're reminded to take those values out into the world. So as you enter and you leave, there it is sitting there. We find the first evidence of mezuzot in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's thousands of years of history of their being used. Now, originally what they did in its earliest form, and it says write it on the doorpost, they did. They carved it into the doorposts. God knows what led to a change. You know, someone had very precious wood and didn't want to carve. But ultimately they ended up with this tool that they put the documents inside and hung on the wall. All right? Yes?
It's what were found in what
Dead Sea Scrolls. All right. In your package it says, from the Shulchan Aruch. I want to give you the laws of mezuzah here. Okay? So it's in the packet. Take a look. It is a divine command to affix a mezuzah to every door of the room, even if one has many rooms. And in every room there are many doors. One must affix a mezuzah to every one of the doors, even though only one of the doors is usually used. The mezuzah should be affixed on the right-hand side as one enters, okay, within the upper third of the doorpost, but at least one handbreadth from the top. So it can't be right against the top. Okay? Should be fastened with nails to the doorpost diagonally. All right, having the top of the Shema towards the house. Now again, that's also the debate between, I'm sure, debate, should it be vertical, should it be horizontal, so they found some compromise. Let's do it diagonally. If the doorpost is not wide enough, you can do it vertically. If you don't have a choice, then you do it vertically. If we simply suspend the mezuzah, it's not valid. So if you just put a nail on the top, not the bottom, and it's sort of whatever, that's not valid. It has to be affixed. The bracha is affixed, the mezuzah. Okay? Right. You want to write the drash on why not? You know, right, we get it. Exactly. That is correct. That is correct. You know, just as an interesting point, on the one hand, we recognize that the behaviors in the bathroom would not normally be considered holy behaviors. On the other hand, we have a blessing that goes with the behaviors that go in that recognize the miracle of life and how our bodies work. So it's sort of a contradiction.
So when you have a home that has lots of arches that you go in and out of, that you then have them on both sides because they're gates, or not at all?
I don't know. So let's keep going. And I don't think it's addressed in the Shulchan Aruch. That's why I don't, yeah. A house used as a temporary residence needs no mezuzah. Therefore, there's no mezuzah on the sukkah. It's only temporary. So that's where you go into the Talmud. You start with the Shulchan Aruch and you go into the Talmud and 9 million what ifs. And the same thing with your question, right? Yes.
If you go and rent a house to vacation in, are you...
It's a temporary home. Depends on how long you... I think, to be honest with you, I think 30 days is the general guide. But I'm not going to swear to it. That's why I was reluctant to answer the question. I think it's 30 days, but I can't swear to it. Stores, which are permanently occupied with merchandise as opposed to a bazaar, need a mezuzah. There's a permanence to them. If a person moves from a house and sells his house to somebody else Jewish, all right, you cannot remove the mezuzah. You can request that the person pay for it. No, another option is to buy it. You have a precious mezuzah you love, is to put a new one up for them. In other words, you have to leave them with a mezuzah. Right? If you have the mezuzah hung on your grandparents' house, you're going to take that with you, but you're going to put something else up in its place. I am wrong. The occupant of a new house has 30 days to affix a mezuzah. So there's your 30 days. I knew the number was coming from somewhere. Because the purpose of the mezuzah is to remind us of God's name, we should kiss the mezuzah upon leaving the house and upon entering it. And then Al-Shech gives you just the reasons I gave you before. Why on all the rooms? One should not think that only in public one should avoid wrongdoing. And even in the innermost rooms, we need to refrain from sin. I was giving you Al-Shech when I said it before. That's all within the one paragraph. So next time you get to Shema, you need an hour. We'll stop and wait for you. Yeah, 1, 2. So clearly, the doorpost represented something to the ancients. All right, whether or not those are directly connected, it's possible. But I can't say, I don't know that anybody would say absolutely. Clearly, the doorpost had some significance, and in both cases, it's used that way. Yes. No, it's not a closet. Do you have an open concept in your house, or do you have walls between rooms? What's that? It could be the arches, but look, you could have your dining room could be separate. It could be part of your living room. Are they separate rooms or they are not? Okay, right. Okay. Yeah. Yes, and then you're next. Yes. How do we know that the mezuzah is kosher? So technically, every 7 years, you should have someone come and check the text. What makes the mezuzah kosher is the text within it, just like a Torah. And so you should have someone come and check that the text has not worn away, because it's parchment. The ink on parchment doesn't sink in like it does on paper. It sits atop, and therefore is vulnerable. Okay?
And also, as a former art teacher, we need to provide opportunities for our craftsmen
Yeah.
to create beautiful pieces.
Right, we do the concept of Hidur mitzvah. We beautify a mitzvah when we engage in such. I need to make one basic announcement. So those of you who were in the last class, you've already heard this, but I apologize. On the schedule, it says we have no class on the 10th, and we're meeting on the 17th. And I'll send out an email to remind everybody. We're reversing that, and I'll tell you why in a second. We are meeting on the 10th. We're not meeting on the 17th, because on the 17th, the Consulate General is going to come and speak to the congregation. Okay? And so we're just reversing it so that that's when she's available, so we're accommodating her schedule accordingly. Okay? So I'll send out an email to this effect, but now you'll know why I'm sending it to you. On the 10th, yes. The 17th, it's not class, but please come and hear the Consulate General. Okay? Any questions? Did you all shma me? Did you all shma me? Exactly.
Back in the early times before Rabbinic Judaism, isn't there a statement that says that if your children are...
Deuteronomy. Yeah. So, yeah, this is the Bain Sorerum Ora.
So if one of the kids...
We're leaving. Yeah, if your child, look, the reality of it is the Torah has the statement of if your child is rebellious and a glutton and a drunkard, you are to bring him to the gates and they are to be stoned. No child ever lived that. It's one of those things the rabbis wrote out of existence through interpretation. So if your child, well, if the child is less than 12 years old, you can't hold them accountable. That doesn't count. If they're 13, they're no longer children. So now you got 1 year to work with, right? If they're a glutton, well, if mom provides the food and she gives them a lot of food, you can't not eat what mom puts in front of you. That's disrespectful. If you're at a party, of course you're going to eat a lot. So parties don't count. And by the way, if it's not kosher, that doesn't count either. In terms of being a drunkard, well, if it's not kosher wine, that doesn't count either. So but what they did is they didn't get rid of the law. They reinterpreted it in a way that it could never be applied.
But if your kid, whenever you started teaching him Torah, he said, I'm not going to do this.
Of course that's what the kid says. What do you mean? I don't even understand the question. Of course that's what the kid says.
Then can you take him to the gates?
Yes.
Well, no, it doesn't say. All right. So first of all, it's a child. It's a child who the prohibition is against. So if your children are getting drunk, we have to talk. But you also have to qualify and all the other ones as well. And I'm not a big fan of getting drunk on Purim. It made sense in a world in which you rode your donkey home. Right. If you're walking home or riding your donkey home, what could happen? You'll fall off the donkey. In today's world, it's different. What's that? I know. They take it very literally, and I don't.